This is Dr. Keith Rose and Knives in on the Scalpel. We've got a lot to cover today. We're going to take our scalpel out. We're going to cut down to the truth. We're going to dissect it out. We're going to give you what we feel like we've uncovered or not uncovered, but we just want to explain to you what's going on today in our world, in our life. What do you mean by our world and our life? I mean, what's going on right now? What's going on in pop culture? What's going on in politics? Just what's going on, period. I need to start out and make a correction, though. Yesterday's podcast, I have to apologize to my listeners. I'm a surgeon, and I get up early in the morning. I come in at 5 in the morning to work on this podcast. I do my prep the night before, but I also have a day job where I work through the entire day. And I was a little tired yesterday, and I called the Palestinian Authority, the PLA, the Palestinian Liberation Authority, getting that, confused with the PLO, which was the Palestinian Liberation Organization, but now the Palestinian Authority is in charge over there in Palestine, and I was talking about Rashida Tlaib and how the Palestinian Authority is keeping down the Palestinians by not releasing funds to hospitals, to people that need it, so that they can look better or look more victimized on the world stage. So I want to make that correction. We're not perfect here, so we want to call ourselves out to start this off. But what we've been talking about and what I feel like is important is we have to get back to common sense. We have to be the contrast. We have to understand what is going on. And that's difficult because we've talked about how the media is dead. Really not the media. The media is alive and well. Journalism is dead. We've talked about the different things going on, the social justice warriors, which we call whiners. But more importantly, we have to get after the narrative and be the contrast. So I want to say that this is basically the year we need to slay the narrative. Not slay as in kinetically, but slay as in metaphorically. We have to shut it down. And the only way we're going to do that is to get back to our founding, to understand what makes America great and America good. I always love the quote, America is great because America is good. I think they credit this to de Tocqueville, Alexander de Tocqueville. He says, America has laws that tell them what they can do and morals that tell them what they can't. How come we've gotten away from that? It seems we've redefined American culture where political correctness has now replaced moral erectness. Where right and wrong have become, I have a right because I feel I've been wronged. We've slowly migrated away from individual liberty, personal responsibility, and consequences of action, evolving into elementary school functions that ensure no child's feelings are left behind. No field day competition or dodgeball. No cyber, physical, emotional, or unconscious bullying, and safe places on university campuses where college students won't get their feelings bruised unless they develop the proper skills to deal with the controversy, difficulties, and what we in the real world just like to call life. Today's liberal parents and educators have gone from helicopter parenting to total bumpers, training wheels, and earmuffs with social filters. This has given us a society that has produced some of the most self-entitled, whiny, see social justice whiners, risk-averse citizens who are constantly looking for the next unicorn to ride to the gumdrop waterfall where they can drink hipster bucks coffee in a safe, non-threatening atmosphere. The problem is that this utopia only exists in the platitudes of charismatic demigod politicians and the socialists looking to carry on this mantle. While the sword of Damocles draws ever near the critical tipping point, a lapdog, Praetorian Guard media continues to gloss over the truth and often whitewash current reality so that you continually chase the scandal du jour as provided by the progressive think tanks that leak to the mainstream media and the progressive talking political heads, or what I like to call the bobbleheads, to continue the unraveling of our Constitution and its values. Mix in unsustainable entitlements, profligate spending by both aisles in Congress, the continuing destruction of our healthcare system and foreign policy that has put every man, woman, child, transgender, gay, or whatever you call yourself in serious peril, and you can see why we've got a lot of work to do. So let's put on our gloves and get to work. We're going to start out with this Epstein scandal. Now, it's all over the news. And I always look at news from a different angle. I don't always want to see what is being asked. I also like to see what is not being asked. Because I think you can tell a lot about what's going on by figuring out what's not going on. You see, the news, we know now. We don't have to suspect the news is fake. We don't have to suspect that they're trying to fool us. We know they are. So when I look at the news, I look at it from a different optic. I look at it more from the optic of, yeah, I think they're trying to get me to think one thing or another. So when I Google something, and I use Google, I use a lot of other internet search engines, but when you use Google, I know Google has an algorithm that's going to put the most liberal, progressive talking points straight to the front. So what we're talking about right now is Jeffrey Epstein, the billionaire. For the two people that haven't heard about this yet, there was a billionaire that is evidently, this has been known for quite some time, that is a pedophile. He likes really, really, really young girls. But the mainstream media is trying to tie this billionaire not to former President Bill Clinton, who flew on his plane multiple times as shown by flight logs. No, they want to tie this billionaire to our current president, President Trump. We're going to dig into that and find out, is that true? Is that not true? What that means? But more importantly, I think the question needs to be asked, why this guy got off in the first place? Because evidently he got a sweetheart plea deal, and I think fleshing that out is important. I think fleshing out truth is important, and I'm going to actually enter an angle in here that no one's going to really like, and I'm going to enter an angle in here going, why would someone help a guy that preys on little girls? I don't care how good his lawyers are. How could someone morally, someone with character, someone with the proper fabric in their lives, look at this guy and not just turn around and vomit? I'm not judging him. None of us are perfect. There's only one perfect person that ever lived. And he died and rose again and is in heaven now. That's my faith. Those are my beliefs. But there are really no perfect people. We are all pretty rotten, and we've all been dumpster fires at some point in our lives. But this guy, he's special. And so when I was looking up and looking at all the different articles and reviews, I came across something in The Last Refuge, and it was an article titled, "Decade-Long Epstein Investigative Reporter Calls Bill Clinton a Liar." It was published yesterday. I thought this was important because this investigative reporter has been looking at this guy for 10 years. Her name is Conchita Sarnoff. She spent over a decade looking at documents and talking to officials and witnesses about Jeffrey Epstein. When asked about Bill Clinton's claim that he traveled with Mr. Epstein 4 times, Ms. Sarnoff flat out called out Clinton a liar based on known documentary evidence, flight log, and witness accounts. Now, shocker of all shockers, she actually called him a liar. Well, I think it's important to read this article, but it's more important to listen to what this lady has to say. And it's a long clip. We're going to start it. We're going to stop it. We're going to dissect it because I really want to understand what this guy is all about. Now, everything I read, this guy is just a slimy, slimy person. I'm not judging him. I'm judging his actions. I don't know this man. I know what I read. But I've read a lot. And if a fraction of it's true, there are some people involved in this original prosecution that are going to have some answering to do. So let's start out with this cut. I believe it's cut 5. Go.
Well, investigative journalist Conchita Sarnoff joins us now. She's been covering this case since the beginning. She's also author of the book Trafficking and the executive director at Alliance to Rescue Victims of Trafficking. Conchita, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Shannon, for having me.
You raised an interesting point in your research that it's the...
Stop for a second. In this article, they're putting a where she's being interviewed by, I believe, Shannon Bream from Fox News. It's embedded in here, but I think it's important to give attribution and let you know where we find this. None of this that I'm pointing on right now is original. It's just done from research and what I call cross-checking. I look at one source, I look at another. If they cross, if they check out, then I look at a third. If I get a bunch that are pointing in the same direction, that's the way I head. Continue.
Palm Beach County is the one that doesn't get as much attention, but he was a critical player here, so much concerning to the then chief of police there in Palm Beach County that he actually put together this response and sent it. He referred it to the FBI saying, we need the feds to get involved because somehow there's so much pressure on this county state's attorney that we don't think this is going anywhere.
Stop. Right now she's talking about when the investigation was going on, there was pressure on the county state's attorney. Has anyone even heard that guy's name mentioned? Because I haven't. I hear a lot about Acosta's name being mentioned because he's our labor secretary. He's tied to our president. But right now, this lady's talking about the genesis of all this, when it all began. She hasn't even mentioned him yet. And I'm not saying Acosta gets a free pass on this. He doesn't get a political hall pass. All I'm saying is there's always more to the story. You have to look. Continue.
You know, this is my biggest question, and I don't understand why no one is pointing fingers at and actually explaining why Barry Kersher cut the deal that he cut. The onus fell on the state attorney's office. As you know, after the chief of police, Michael Ritter, whom I spoke to at length for many, many years since I started the investigation back in 2009, Ritter said to me many times, I did not accept Kersher's deal. He wanted to charge him with a misdemeanor, no jail time.
Listen to this. This is the police chief being interviewed back in 2009. This is just a year or 2 years after the plea deal. I think the plea deal was in 2007, 2008. And this police chief is saying, I did not want to accept the original plea deal offered, which would have been a misdemeanor. Now, if you listened to the show yesterday, you've heard the voices of the victims. It was yesterday or the day before of Mr. Acosta. I believe it was the day before. You've heard these voices. You heard those young girls talking. And we're not talking just young girls at 17, 16. Some of these girls were 14 years old that we know about. I have 2 daughters. A lot of you out there have daughters. So I think it's very important to understand what type of predator this person is and then what type of people continued to set him free. Continue.
No restitution and no registration as a sex offender. Then he took the case. Ritter takes the case to the feds.
The police chief.
Yes, Michael Ritter, the Palm Beach police chief, takes the case to the feds. That's when Acosta comes in. That's not until 2006. And so Acosta and his team, with Villafana and others, they start to investigate.
Okay, stop. So this all began a while back. The plea deal was struck in 2007, 2008. But obviously the investigation predates that quite significantly because those wheels of justice don't move too fast sometimes. So the feds are called in. Acosta comes in, but there's another person named on Acosta's team. I'm not giving Acosta a hall pass, but he was a U.S. attorney. And he wasn't working by himself any more than Mueller was working by himself. He had a whole group of chuckleheads working with him. The difference is this U.S. attorney is actually investigating a crime, where Mueller was just investigating something to hang around a president to stop his politics, his agenda. He was looking for a crime. Here we have one. Continue.
There's a 53-page indictment against Epstein. But what happens? Well, we're getting close to the 2008 presidential campaign. Hillary Clinton is the...
Stop for a second. I'm sorry I keep stopping, but we need to dissect this out. You have a sexual predator, multiple eyewitnesses, multiple complainants, multiple people interviewed, witnesses, victims, and you got a 53-page indictment. Yet we have a president of the United States that was investigated for 2 years that they wrote a small book on, yet couldn't point to one crime. I just want to contrast what's going on here. This is an actual crime with a true slime ball. And the other was a political and what I feel like a judicial crime, investigating a president to investigate him and try to find something. You see, to take back and slay the narrative, we have to be the contrast. Continue.
Shoo-in at the time, President Obama was still not at the forefront. And so I believe, given the information that I have and what I've read, that at the very top of the food chain, they did not want to make, as the Attorney General said to me when I interviewed him, Alberto Gonzales, they did not want to make a political mess.
Stop. This is Alberto Gonzales, and I'm not giving him a pass here. They're talking about Hillary Clinton was probably going to be the nomination for the Democratic nomination for president. They thought that for the Democrat Party, she was going to be the nominee at the time. And Alberto Gonzales said he didn't want to make a political mess. Are you kidding me? This is why the founders pushed so hard for morality. This is why the founders pushed so hard for biblical principles, not biblical doctrine, not over-religious activity, just principles. You know, right and wrong, America being good because America is great. They didn't have the right idea and principles here. Their idea and principles were not to get to the bottom of a crime. They were to not create a political firestorm. That is in direct contrast to the attack on President Trump, the 2-year bogus investigation on Russian collusion, when they were trying to make a political firestorm by getting a crime. One. Let me just break it down very simply. Here was a roaring fire, and they're saying we don't want to pour water on it because we don't want to cause a political firestorm. We have a roaring fire, and we're going to get out the hose, and we're going to hose it down to something that's palatable because we don't cause a political firestorm. Then fast forward 10 years to President Trump. Here, you don't even have a fire. They're not holding a big fire hose. They're holding a can of gasoline and a box of matches going, we got to start a fire here to cause a political firestorm, to look for a crime. Look at the contrast. Continue.
So they basically tapped Acosta again, which is also why they hired Ken Starr and Jay Lefkowitz, who were the two.
Lots of high-profile names involved in this thing.
Absolutely. They were the two attorneys who negotiated the plea deal, meaning the non-prosecution agreement that was handed to Epstein, which, by the way, was not in order, as Acosta told me, because I have been speaking to Acosta for many years since the original investigation and the original arrest in 2005.
Well, let me ask you this, because tonight President Clinton has spoken out and said, I want to make it clear that there was some travel with him. There was always Secret Service. We had brief meetings. You know, people who are trying to tie the two of them together, just like there were people tonight trying to tie Epstein to President Trump, that those are unfair leaps in logic, the Clintons say.
I have read too much information, and I have spoken to too many people on the inside. I actually attempted to interview Clinton, but he did not agree to do so. And I know from the pilot logs, and these are pilot logs that, you know, were written by different pilots and at different times, that Clinton went. He was a guest of Epstein's 27 times. Now, you tell me. Doug Bands was also on the plane many times. Many of those times, Clinton had his Secret Service with him, and many times he did not.
You see, what this reporter is saying, Ms. Sarnoff, flat out calls out Bill Clinton as a liar. For those of you that weren't born when Bill Clinton was president, I think it's important to hear him in his own words and see if you think this man tells the truth or not. Because he's a known liar. He's a known philanderer. I'm not making this up. I'm not slandering him. This is just open source. But let's listen to Bill Clinton in his own words back when he was president. Now, he says here he only traveled with Mr. Epstein 4 times. This reporter says not so much. I interviewed a ton of people. He traveled over 25, 26, 27 times, not always with his Secret Service. But let's listen to our former commander-in-chief. Cut 4, go.
But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people. Thank you.
Okay, I need to go back to work. These allegations are false. I did not have sexual relations. I don't know what you call what happened between President Clinton, this is a family-friendly show, and Miss Lewinsky, but I believe, and I'm a physician, oral sex constitutes sexual relations. President Clinton, former President Clinton, who lost his law license for lying, President Clinton lied, and he's lying again. And actually, I think that's important. Let's listen to the rest of this clip. Continue, Cutfoot.
Clinton's name is on the pilot logs. There are underage girls. There are initials, and there are names of many, many girls on that private plane. So you have to ask yourself, and this is what I asked myself, why would anyone, not only a former president, fly on a plane 27 times that did not belong to him?
Okay, so the statement from his office, or his spokesman tonight, says he knows nothing about the terrible crimes that Epstein pleaded guilty to in Florida some years ago, or those which he's recently been charged with in New York. He goes on to talk about he took a total of 4 trips with him. He had Secret Service, he had detail, he once had a meeting with him in his office, he had security and staff members.
You can cut here. Basically, what this is going, Clinton's denial. Bill Clinton's a liar. Bill Clinton's lying now. This lady has the proof. In fact, she's had it for evidently over a decade. And I think that's important. Now, I'm only going to talk about things that I know to be true or that I highly suspect based on the evidence. I don't know where this case will end up. I don't know if justice will be done. I do know Jeffrey Epstein is a real slimeball. And I do know another thing. You know who didn't fly on that airplane? Donald J. Trump. You know where there's no evidence that he flew on that airplane? That's President Trump. Now, when I went, and I talked about this at the beginning of the show, when I was doing my research, one of the first articles that came up is titled, "Both Trump and Clinton Went to Jeffrey Epstein's Sex Slave Island." Now, that doesn't shock me that that article came up, because the media is gone full Praetorian Guard to protect the liberal ideology. So what they're doing is they're going after President Trump. They're going to find that one picture, that one soundbite where he said Jeffrey was a terrific guy almost 20 years ago. Have you ever listened to President Trump talk? If someone asks you about another guy, you don't know him, well, he's a terrific guy. I mean, you don't talk negative about people. He didn't even know him that well. I really don't know their relationship, but I do know there is no evidence that he went to the island. I do know there's no evidence he was on that plane. But this article titled, "Both Trump and Clinton Went to Jeffrey Epstein's Sex Slave Island," really bothers me. But I'll tell you what bothers me more. Actually, it embarrasses me. This is from the Daily Wire. Now, if anyone that knows me know I'm a huge fan of the Daily Wire. I'm a huge fan of Ben Shapiro. I believe Mr. Shapiro has honor, integrity, and virtue, based on the times that I've heard his podcast and listened to him. How I would recommend that he go back and actually look at this and comment on it, because they're using the Daily Wire to beat our current president over his head. And you know what? This article is just wrong. It's written by Amanda Prestigiacomo, and it was written on May 16, 2016. This is before the elections, obviously. And I understand Ben Shapiro. I've listened to him. He's not a huge President Trump fan. He doesn't believe that he's a moral or righteous man. And I would tell Mr. Shapiro, you know what? You're probably right in that in the past. But see, as I believe, everyone has a chance to change and grow. I believe in forgiveness. I believe that people can change. Our founders believed it. If you look at our founders, not all of them prior to the founding would have been called moral and righteous men, but they acted righteously. Something clicked inside them that made them want to be righteous, not relevant. You see, righteous principles produce historical relevance. Trying to be relevant just produces temporary hysteria. And I don't know why this article was written, because I got to tell you, this lady that we just listened to was available for comment back then if someone wanted to look hard enough. But I'm going to read this article to you, and it pains me to do that. And I will tell you, the Daily Wire is top shelf conservative website. They're awesome. This article, not so much. It starts out, one Twitter user asked me, is it too much to hope that one of our parties would pick someone with no links to a pedophile sex slave island? Wow, a Twitter person asked you that, so you needed to go down on it and go further on to that question and write an article on it? Apparently, it is too much to ask for. Both presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump and former President Bill Clinton have ties to convicted pedophile and Democrat donor, billionaire Jeffrey Epstein and sex slave island. Okay, right there, there is no evidence that President Trump has ties to sex slave island. Period, full stop. If you read down in this article, she talks, Clinton was aboard the infamous Lolita, she says as noted by the Free Beacon, owned by a billionaire pedophile at least 26 times, not initially reported 11 times. Now Clinton says it's 4 times, but we know Bill Clinton's a liar. And it goes on to talk about Clinton's presence above that, on that plane and the official flight logs. And then she gets down here and says the Republican presumptive nominee apparently got in on the action too. Trump's ties to Epstein, a man Trump's once called a terrific guy, and Sex Slave Island have been chronicled in the Daily Wire here. So I just followed the link because I want to know where they chronicled it. And that article was titled 7 Things You Need to Know About Trump and Sex Slave Island. It goes down and it says, so we're already on one article. We're going to the second article from the Daily Wire, May 9th. So she wrote this article, and then a week earlier had written this one that I'm going to, says, presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump has thrown everything but the kitchen sink at Hillary Clinton when it comes to her husband's escapades. The kitchen sink in this case is Jeffrey Epstein's sex slave island and President Bill Clinton's ties to it. Why wouldn't Trump use this ammo? The answer is simple. He's saying he did everything but this. Trump himself has ties to Epstein, the billionaire Democrat donor and convicted pedophile known for having underage sex slaves on his private plane in what the media calls Sex Slave Island. Here are the 7 connections between Trump and the sex slave island. Here's her 7 connections. Trump himself has said that Epstein is a lot of fun to be with. Mr. Shapiro, I've listened to your podcast recently because I read this and I had to go listen to your last podcast. You yourself say that's not a reason to tie Trump or anyone to this pervert, adding that he admired the sex offender's affinity for beautiful women on the younger side. Well, this guy was old, ma'am, so he liked younger women. We now know he's a pedophile. Doesn't mean Trump knew or supported that. She goes on to say Trump was named in Epstein's little black book. Okay, he had Trump's phone number, one billionaire to another. Then, I love 3. Trump has allegedly flown on Epstein's private plane, a hotspot. This goes on to say Mark Epstein, Jeffrey's brother, testified in 2009 that Trump flew on Jeffrey's private jet at least once. The only problem here is there's no proof of that. There are some salacious allegations, but there's 0 proof. They say both Trump and Epstein are named as sex abusers in a case with underage person. Here's the difference. Epstein has been convicted. Trump, it was alleged, he adamantly denied it, and they say suspecting the claim is possibly a hoax since allegedly no evidence the plaintiff actually exists. That's what Trump's team said. At least you wrote that, but you imply that this is real. Epstein admitted knowing Trump under oath, but then pled the 5th to Trump attending sex parties with underage girls. You know why he pled the 5th, Epstein did, for Trump attending sex parties with underage girls? Because that would mean he was there with underage girls. If he says no, Trump wasn't there, then they would say, why are you there with underage girls? If he said Trump was there, then they would say, why are you there? I mean, this is not honest journalism, and it's from the Daily Wire, and this bothers me. Look, I'm not a perfect person. No one is. But Mr. Shapiro, I would pretty much look at this. I'm not saying you have to like Donald Trump, but look at his actions. He wasn't my first choice, like he wasn't yours. But I'll tell you what, he has been way more conservative than I thought he would be. And quite frankly, he's the most conservative president we've had since Ronald Reagan, and he may surpass President Reagan on conservatism. Let's just be honest. This article goes on, at least one of Epstein's underage sex victims was recruited from Trump's Mar-a-Lago, which he frequented often. Mar-a-Lago, which he frequented often. Yeah, did you also know that Trump banned him from Mar-a-Lago for hitting on the staff? He met someone working for President Trump who probably has thousands of employees. She also talks, number 7, Trump was subpoenaed in 2009 for his connection to Epstein's underage sex slave rings. Trump has denied ever being served. They talk about subpoenaing him, but he denied it. The problem is there's no evidence that Trump was ever with Epstein when he was with underage girls. There's no evidence that he was on the Lolita Express, Epstein's plane. There's a lot of evidence Bill Clinton was. So why would they log President Clinton's name on the plane but not Donald Trump? He was just Donald Trump, the businessman back then. So it would make sense, pilots keep flight logs, that the former president of the United States' name is there, but not the current president of the United States, Donald J. Trump. I love the Daily Wire. I highly recommend it. Ben Shapiro's podcast is amazing. The guy is brilliant. This article is garbage. You know, I want to understand why people talk like this, because this article reminds me of what's went on currently, or what's going on currently, attacking our president over a faux scandal. But there's actually a precedent for attacking people and making up stuff. It comes from a guy named, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Lavinci Beria, the most ruthless and longest-serving secret police chief in Joseph Stalin's reign of terror in Russia and Eastern Europe, bragged that he could prove criminal conduct on anyone, even the innocent. This is the gentleman that famously quoted, "Show me the man and I'll show you the crime," was Beria's infamous boast. He served as deputy premier from 1941 until Stalin's death in 1953, supervising the expansion of the gulags and other secret detention facilities for political prisoners. He became part of the post-Stalin, short-lived ruling Troika until he was I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I don't speak Russian. Until he was executed for treason after Nikita Khrushchev's coup d'etat in 1953. Beria targeted the man first, then proceeded to find or fabricate a crime. Beria's modus operandi was to presume the man guilty and fill in the blanks later. By contrast, under the United States Constitution, there is a presumption of innocence that emanates from the 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendments, as set forth in Coffin versus U.S. Now, I'm just a doctor. I'm not a lawyer, but I know Mr. Shapiro is, and he knows those cases. Guy is wicked smart. So I would probably go back, and you may have done this. I just found this article when I was prepping right before, but I looked. I see she still works there. I haven't seen the apology for this article, and if it's out there, I'm wrong. But Miss Amanda, you were wrong to put this out. You threw a bunch of salacious allegations out there, and you actually titled it with something that Trump went to this island when there is no proof. You know, it says, if you're going to talk the talk, walk the walk. So Amanda Prestigiamo, or however you pronounce your last name, I apologize. Walk the walk. And I'm sure you do. I read some of your other articles and they were great. This one, not so much. Now let's get back to Mr. Epstein and what's going on there. Well, what are the Democrats doing with this? Well, they're raising political hay because that's what Democrats do. And there's no one better at raising political hay than Chucky Schmucky Schumer. Schumer calls for the Labor Secretary Acosta to resign over handling the Epstein case because virtue signaling is a big deal when it's politically expedient. Cut 3, go.
Calling on Secretary Acosta to resign. It is now impossible for anyone to have confidence in Secretary Acosta's ability to lead the Department of Labor.
Stop.
If he
No one can have confidence in Secretary Acosta to lead the Department of Labor based on his handling over the Epstein case. Well, unfortunately, this is not the first case that has involved sex in underage girls, or sexual misconduct in underage girls, or sexting, or anything like that. Actually, there was another case of a politician, a former congressman, that was involved in this, and that would be, drumroll, Anthony Weiner. But you see, Schumer birthed the Weiner. And as everyone anyone who's listened to me understands this, I like to wrap the Weiner around Schumer's neck. Because Schumer was his mentor. So I dug back and I remembered when Anthony Weiner, after he left under a big cloud of disgrace, decided to run for mayor in New York. And Schumer was asked whether he condemned Weiner's actions. Let's see what he had to say. Cut to go.
Senator Schumer, before we go, need to ask you about somebody who some have called your former protege, Anthony Weiner. Obviously left Congress in disgrace, now is considering a run for mayor. I don't expect you to make any endorsements in the mayor's race, but tell me, does Anthony Weiner deserve a second chance?
Look, I'm not going to comment on that. How'd I know you'd ask that question, Jonathan?
You're not going to comment at all? Do you think you don't?
Nope.
Not even whether he deserves a second chance?
No comment.
No comment at all. That is rare. We have Senator Schumer with a no comment. Thank you very much, Senator.
Wow. Senator Schumer, no comment. No comment on the guy that you started his political career. Big comment on a guy that sits on the other or that comes from the other side of the aisle. No, I'm not giving Acosta a pass. And I think most likely from what I've seen, he probably needs to resign. But I doubt that that's the end of the story. I doubt he's the only one that made the decision. And it seems like he didn't actually make the decision. Someone else did, but he was there. He may have and probably went along with it. And I don't have all the facts, and I'm not going to just start spouting out of the other part of my body since I don't have all the facts. But when I was reading, I look back, and it's amazing how the Democrats created or exploited the term war on women for political gain for the better part of a year. But then their own party got caught up in the midst of multiple scandals involving sexual harassment, assault, predatory actions against women. Then you heard Chuck Schumer refusing to condemn any vulgar mistreatment at that time. Because when he was with Weiner, Weiner was his protege. You know what Schumer said of Weiner? I looked it up. He called the congressman a man of integrity after the initial sexting scandal was public. So Schumer supported his protege and said he was a man of integrity. I don't think the founders would see it that way, but Hair Club for Men does. So he thought he was a man of integrity after the initial sexting. And then he joined fellow New York Senator at the time, Kristen Gillibrand, and former New York Senator Hillary Clinton and former President Bill Clinton in refusing to condemn the actions that most of us find pretty jacked up or reprehensible. Condemning sexual assault, I found written in this article, and I apologize, I cut and pasted it because it was from a blog, but it was actually came out of the NRSC press. In refusing to condemn actions that most normal citizens find reprehensible, condemning sexual assault and harassment shouldn't be controversial simply because the predator is someone of a certain persuasion. But Chuck Schumer, the most powerful Democrat senator, actually refuses to do it. It went on to talk about Chuck Schumer has based Senate Democrats' 2014 electoral strategy entirely on exploiting the manufactured war on women. Yet when it comes to time to actually defend real women, actual victims of harassment, Schumer and his buddies were nowhere to be found. You see, the Democrats don't have hard, fast morals. They're more from the sophistic side of the intellectual aisle, meaning whatever they think at the time, whatever they feel at the time, whatever they scream loud enough is what you should believe. It's what you think should happen. I have a problem with this, and I'm going to watch this very carefully because I think a lot of names are going to come out we haven't even heard yet. But to restore the faith of the American people in our judiciary and Department of Justice, we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to get to the bottom of the FBI, the CIA, trumping up a fake investigation on our current president. We need to get to the bottom of a lot of things. And as I did the other day, I can just go back to George Washington's famous letter. And he talked about morality. He talked about biblical principles. And when he talked about it, the really cool thing was when he talked about it, he talked about how important it was, not just for the American people, but also for our judiciary in oaths. You see, when you believe in something and you swear an oath to it, it matters to you. When you believe in nothing and swear an oath to it, then it's malleable. It's easily changed based on the political winds. It's time to stop those political winds and start reinstituting the ideals, the morals, the values, the constitutional principles that made this nation great. This is Dr. Keith Rose. We're back on the scalpel. And as a doctor, I like to look at things a lot of times from an analytical medical viewpoint. Now, I'm a plastic surgeon, and I do a lot of reconstructive surgery. And as of late, the past 5 or 6 years, I've done a ton of cosmetic surgery. We call that reconstruction for the soul. Anyone that's had it, mommy makeovers, things like that, understand what I'm talking about. See, as a surgeon, I can fix the exterior. A lot of doctors can. There's some great doctors out there, internal medicine doctors, pediatricians. They can fix you when you're sick on the inside. But when you're morally bankrupt, man, that's a tough one. Now, no one's perfect. We've all had our moments. And by grace, you hope that as you age and as you understand what's going on, you can change, because having moral fiber, having virtue is what made this country great. And I believe, and I don't think I'm being a Pollyanna, that we can get back to that, because I don't see any other way to turn this ship around. You know, I look at it from a medical side, and I think, what is the only organism or system that does not have a negative feedback loop? You know, in your body, when you eat something, your body dumps insulin into your bloodstream. And that insulin lowers your blood sugar, because if you eat a bunch of cookies, like I did last night, then it dumps insulin into your bloodstream and it lowers your blood sugar. And when your blood sugar gets below a certain level, that insulin stops producing, because it's a negative feedback loop. And that's important, because if you uncouple that negative feedback loop, you get things like diabetes. If you don't have the ability for your surveillance cells in your body, and I'm on a 100,000-foot view here, to police the bad cells or the cancer cells in your body, and then you're going to get cancer. And when the cancer grows, it metastasizes. So what is the only organism or system that doesn't have a negative feedback loop consistently? In fact, its consequences are so uncoupled from its actions, it proliferates at the expense of anything and everything in its path. That seems like basically the progressive liberals right now. It's not cancer, but both are similar. But cancer eventually kills the host. And it's not a parasite, but that's a close guess too. Nah, it's our political system. The liberal elites. A feedback loop was set in place back at the birth of our nation, though. Co-equal branches in the notion of sacred honor. The organism has slowly evolved and realized that they do not have to follow a feedback loop if they can convince the host that the actual negative feedback was unfair, racist, incorrect, or incorrectly interpreted. Meaning you don't understand, or as President Clinton said, let me be clear. When that happens, you get full metastasis. And that brings us to our current politicians in Washington, D.C., or as I like to call it, and everyone else, the swamp. It's not what the definition of is, but whatever they want the definition of anything to be. And by the way, be sure and pay your taxes, abide by all the regulations that are spit out at a rate that actual politicians themselves are not even aware of. This country is sick. Obamacare is the law of the land. It's a horrible disease with the worst prognosis. So what do we do about it? What do we do about this negative feedback loop? One is we have to be the contrast. We have to show good versus bad, right versus wrong. We have to show the contrast of what actual virtue looks like. And I don't mean perfection. I don't mean religiosity or anything like that. I'm just talking about basic moral principles. And that's tough in the face of a just out of control mainstream media. And I talked about Obamacare. Obamacare is the law of the land, and Obamacare, from a physician's point of view, sucks. From a patient's point of view, it's really deadly. Cut one, go.
This is a big day for the fate of Obamacare. In New Orleans today, 18 Republican-led states will make their case before an appeals court asking them to strike down Obamacare. The practical and political implications here could be tremendous. If the law is struck down, well, then that could wipe out coverage for millions of Americans. Even if Republicans do win in the courts, they could lose big politically.
Healthcare coverage for millions of you on the line today. A panel of federal judges hearing oral arguments today in a lawsuit filed by a group of Republican states and backed by the Trump administration that could gut the Affordable Care Act. At stake, insurance for 20 million Americans.
And while this may seem like a big win for Republicans, it could be a very risky move. Many Republicans are saying do not do this, putting an issue that has traditionally been a win for Democrats into the spotlight just as 2020 ramps up.
Stop. This is Obamacare. This is the mainstream media, which they feel like is a win. Obamacare was a win, yet no one wants to talk about it. They say Republicans want to repeal and replace it, and that's horrible. Look, I'm a physician. I have actually lived Obamacare and watched it expand and grow. Besides being a plastic surgeon, I own some businesses. One of those is I own several urgent care clinics. So I have watched Obamacare slowly destroy the healthcare system. And that's enough. I have enough information on that for about 6 shows. But let me go to the 100,000-foot view again. They talk about 10 to 20 million people would lose their health care coverage. Well, I will tell you, when Obamacare was instituted, you only had 12 to 18 million that didn't have coverage to begin with. Yet there were hospitals that still saw these patients. There were doctors that still took care of these patients. And there's no such thing as uninsurability because there were high-risk pools in every state. As Ezekiel Manuel, one of the architects of Obamacare, pointed out, Obamacare wasn't designed to make the healthcare system better. It was just designed to hasten its cratering, and I'm paraphrasing what he intimated, to crater it so that we could finally get to a single-payer system. Do you remember Obama and all his promises? You're going to pay $2,000 less. That's what he said. You're going to say $2,000 on your health care. And he said it, and he looked sincere, and he was lying his butt off. The architects knew this wasn't going to make the system better. It added more bureaucracy, more regulations. Miss Sarah Palin talked about death panels. Why? Because that's pretty much what it was going to add to it. It was going to make end-of-life decisions by committee. So what does everyone experience? We now have insurance out there that is anything but affordable. I mean, you can say I have health insurance, but can you afford your deductible? My family insurance was about $400 to $500 a month. When Obamacare was fully implemented, it went up to $2,600 a month with a astronomically higher deductible and 10 times the regulations. You want to get something done, a doctor has to get approval for it. Like writing a basic prescription. They'll get a little note back saying, you write a prescription for antibiotics, and then you get a note back saying it needs to be pre-authorized. So then you have to either go to a computer or call somebody to get permission who is not a doctor, who you don't even know. This is just some faceless bureaucrat that's going to approve your medical decision. That's maybe a little simplified, but I will tell you it's happening. And healthcare costs more now. But one of the clowns in the parade, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she doesn't see it as that. She doesn't see Obamacare as being a problem. In fact, she thinks government health care is awesome. I mean, like, it's totally cool, man, because, it's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she's woke. The only problem is she's not woke to health care. You remember the articles when it came out, she talked about the VA system being an excellent healthcare system. She said it. It was all over the news. Now, in my training in Dallas, we rotated through the VA hospital. Again, another entire podcast on the failure of the VA hospital. There are some good VA hospitals. There are some good people in the VA. But as a whole, the system is broken. Ask any vet. You know, we have a bad healthcare system that the Republicans are trying to fix. And let me pull out the clue bat for those of you that Republicans that lost your reelection bids. You were supposed to repeal and replace Obamacare, and you didn't. And people were pissed off because you said one thing and did another. The American people are paying attention to you, and they're tired of lies and misrepresentations. The founding talked about this quite succinctly. And I suggest you go back and actually take a look at it sometime. Because if you don't have morality, you don't have virtue, you don't have the basic foundations, the basic cornerstone to make the right decisions. And there are real world consequences, and Obamacare is one of them. And I'll do a show on Obamacare someday, and we'll break it down because it is crushing medicine. Usually when we say, oh, they're crushing it, that's a good thing. Here, not so much. We have Obamacare, but we also have to distract from things too. And right now we have a lot of people running for the Democrat nomination for President of the United States. And the latest article I read about Mitch McConnell was that Mitch McConnell is now a slave owner. Or not a slave owner, a descendant of slave owners. If you go on to read multiple articles, basically I'll just sum it up for you. Mitch McConnell's great-great-grandfather, way back in the day, way before he was born, back in the 1800s, owned slaves. And that is evidently news. Because remember, they have to have a narrative. They have to have you chasing something. Look at it like this. When you're in the military, you've seen those movies where you have a fighter plane and someone shoots a missile at it, and then it shoots off these bright lights, this what we call chaff, it shoots off this substance, this metal, these little rockets away as it turns. And those rockets are designed to confuse that missile and to have it move in the opposite direction. So the plane banks to the left and the chaff goes to the right, and the missile just chases it, the pilot hopes, and explodes on that other heat signature and not the actual planes. It's designed to protect the plane by camouflaging it, by shooting off lots of other fake planes or little hot, bursts that confuse the missile. And the mainstream media understands this. The Democrats understand this, so they want to throw out as much chaff as possible. So now they're throwing off the chaff, trying to tie somehow Mitch McConnell to slavery. When I was looking at that, I thought, well, that's kind of stupid, but then I always want to understand why someone would say that. So I started, doing the old Googling thing again and couldn't find much there. So I went to some of my other stuff and I found out there are actual other people that are descendants of slave owners. One of them being Kamala Harris. Now, you haven't heard that in mainstream news, but I was Googling it, couldn't find it, so I started looking back, and I came across something that talked about her father. He actually wrote in January in Jamaica Online, a global online, claiming to be the descendant of famed slave owner. This is Kamala Harris's father. You remember, her father's from Jamaica, her mom's from India, but she is the second coming of Martin Luther King the way she acts and talks. But it says her family is descendants of slave owners, not slaves. Kamala Harris's family, her father writes an essay in January stating that his family's heritage is a descendant of famed slave owner in Jamaica. They have no history with slaves. Their descendancy is from slave owners. These are her father's actual words. He wrote, "My roots go back within my lifetime to my paternal grandmother, Miss Christiana Brown, descendant of Hamilton Brown, who is on record as plantation and slave owner and founder of Brownstown, and to my maternal grandmother, Miss Iris Finnegan, former farmer and educator from Annantown and Inverness, ancestry unknown to me. The Harris name comes from my paternal grandfather, Joseph Alexander Harris, landowner and agriculture, producer, exporter." He goes on to describe how his family, he and therefore his children, are descendants of slave owners, not slaves. In other words, Kamala Harris's ancestors presided over a real plantation. Her family, her ancestors, owned people. Her father's out getting this on the record because, and this is from the article, he's not crazy about some things she's saying. And now she wants to preside over the Democrat plantation. You know, if you're going to go after Mitch McConnell, which I think is total BS, I don't care what your grandfather and great-grandfathers did. I don't blame Mitch McConnell, and I don't blame Kamala Harris. I don't have any problem with what her family did before she was born. None. No, I'll leave that to the Democrats. If you really want to dig further and you really want to look at a lot of kind of interesting things, you can go back to President Obama himself. President Obama himself, I believe, had families that were slave owners. Guardian wrote an article, probably more than 12 years old right now. Obama told a family's slave-owning history in Deep South. You see, Obama didn't support slave reparations, and I think rightly so. I'm going to agree with him on that. Slavery reparations. Either does Mitch McConnell, yet Mitch McConnell's being beat over the head now because they say he's a descendant of a slave owner. But as this article pointed out, it says, as a son of a black Kenyan father and a white Kansan mother, Obama has seemed to embody the harmonious vision of America's multiracial society. However, recent revelations have thrown up an unexpected twist in the tale. Obama's ancestors on his white mother's side appear to have been slave owners. They did some genealogy research, and it came back that Obama's great-great-great-great-grandfather, George Washington Overall, and found out that he owned 2 slaves in Kentucky. And I'm going to tell you something. This is a non-article because, again, I don't hold against President Obama what his great-great-great-great-grandfather did. What I'm not happy about is his 8 years of a failed presidency, him trying to run this country over a cliff because he doesn't feel America is great or America is good. But I'm not going to argue about someone's distant past that has nothing to do with their current future, and either should anyone else. There's a lot in the news right now. When you look at it from an eye of common sense, look at the narrative, pull out the sword of truth, and slay that puppy. Thanks for spending some time with us today. This is Dr. Keith Rosen Knives. Let's just keep freedom rolling.